are two types of inflammation. One inflammation is we see them in abscess, we see them in appendicitis, we see them in cholecystitis fever, where there is an injury and that injury leads to inflammation. But we also see immunoinflammation. Immunoinflammation is, we are talking about rheumatoid arthritis, we are talking about immunoinflammation because of, that is,
chronic inflammatory disease.
Inflammatory spinoarthritis, inflammatory polyarthritis.
SLE.
In all the SLE, in all these conditions, specifically with ankylosing spondylitis or inflammatory spondyloarthritis, these fever only respond to NSAIDs. They may not respond to paracetamol. So therefore we give them more. In fact, in ankylosing spondylitis, we give them naproxen for almost a year because as an anti-inflammatory action.
Indomethacin sometimes given. Yeah, indomethacin is also given, sir.
Yes, indomethacin is also given for a longer time, and a shorter period you give Nimesulide. But whenever we say a fever or a pain not responding, better responding to an NSAID, we say it is immunoinflammation. Therefore, we say that COVID is acute, manageable, immunoinflammatory, viral disease with a post-COVID phase after 9 days.
Okay.
So it's a viral, so therefore it will be self-limiting. It's a viral manageable because today we know the management, and it is immunoinflammatory. Therefore, the fever will better respond to NSAID, and then you need to have a safer NSAID. And it is a viral with a post-viral course. That means after 9 days. Still, we don't know whether it's going to end up into a chronic fatigue syndrome. I personally feel that 10% of the people will end up into a chronic fatigue syndrome because viruses are associated with that. So therefore, this is an immunoinflammation. Therefore, when it comes to pain management and fever management, we need to have an approach of a immunoinflammation and not a simple inflammation. Dr. Mangesh,
Yes,
chikungunya versus COVID-19.
Yeah, chikungunya primarily will come to you with a low-grade fever, but more of a backache and severe joint pains which are involved, and which tend to not respond again to even the regular paracetamol or sometimes even to the regular NSAIDs as well. Viral origin again, but more involves your joints and skeletal muscles. The skeletal system or musculoskeletal system is more involved. And there may not be so much of fatigue. Yes.
So easy to differentiate chikungunya from COVID-19. COVID-19 does not involve joint involvement.
Joints. Yes.
Practically, it does not involve. Ayurveda calls them as Shleshak Kapha is not involved. So therefore, joint involvement, if seen, you have to now talk about is it dengue or is it chikungunya. And in chikungunya, the word chikun is not chicken.
Yes.
Chikun means you are flexing your hands and flexing your legs. Therefore, chikungunya, you can easily differentiate it from COVID-19. And Mangesh has clearly said chikungunya arthritis also may not respond to paracetamol so well. Sometimes you may have to give steroids. Coming back from chikungunya to malaria. Yes, Abhay, malaria versus COVID-19.
Yeah. So malaria, I will see, sir, it is quite prevalent in Odisha. Actually, specifically in falciparum malaria is quite prevalent. So what classically we get, actually this is the season, rainy season, though this is the time today, this year we are getting COVID, but this is the time where classically we get a lot of malaria cases. So our dictum previously was any sort of fever in our society, any sort of fever, if someone is on primary healthcare center, a anti-malarial course should be given. This was such prevalence is so much high. And how we are going to treat or differentiate, usually malaria in our setup usually associated with chills and rigor. And since it is falciparum, usually it comes specifically every 12 hourly you'll get. And the most important thing is, since it is within 2-3 days, patient usually have some sort of loss of consciousness or something like that, usually in our setup. And in malaria, to differentiate COVID, there will be no respiratory symptoms. Classically, we don't get any respiratory symptoms like sore throat, cough, anything what we are getting, or loss of taste or loss of smell, what classically we get in COVID. This is, you will not get this thing in malaria. And another thing, in some cases of malaria, what we have, those who are actually having severe form of malaria, we are getting renal shutdown or associated multi-organ dysfunction. These are rare entities, but majority time with our setup, fever with chills and rigors, sometimes associated with joint pain, and usually it comes with a interval like 8 hourly or 12 hourly like that. And what already I have discussed, usually classically don't have respiratory symptoms, and classically you don't have any sore throat or loss of taste or loss of smell is found in the malaria.
So Mangesh, if I have to differentiate, Mangesh, I'm coming to you. If I have to differentiate malaria in terms of headache, it can be, malaria can have headache, COVID can have headache. But the classical symptom would be, because COVID will not have rigors. It may have chills, but not rigors. Mangesh.
Yeah, sir. There could be additional splenomegaly, which can be easily demonstrable, especially in the patients of malaria. So there can be a hepatosplenomegaly, which is there. And also sometimes there could be a derangement in the hepatic enzymes.
Let's spend some time on acute management of fever, body ache. And one point constant we are getting is that many fever, whether it is hyperthermia because of heat disorders, whether it is leptospirosis, whether it is COVID-19 fever, many fever may not respond to paracetamol. So paracetamol is a weak anti-inflammatory, it's a good anti-fever medicine, but many of the patients may not. In that particular situation, when you want to give a chronic management of a pain, things are different. If you want to give an NSAID for more than 3 months, sometimes you may prefer different drugs. When it comes to acute management of fever, sometimes you need to prefer a NSAID, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And the options with you are, we have ibuprofen, which came into controversy initially because in the COVID, people started debating, should we give it or not? So this has practically gone out of shelf as far as this year's fever is concerned. And then we have nimesulide, mefenamic acid, and naproxen. Indomethacin basically is more for a joint disorders than for a fever. How do we choose between the three of them?
Yeah. So if, again, what Sir has already discussed, that if someone is planning for a specifically for pain or fever, if I am planning for a short course, 5 to 7 days, for me, nimesulide is a good option. There is no need of going to other thing. But again, if I am planning for a quite longer period, most probably my first choice would be indomethacin, where what I can go for almost 2 months, 3 months like that. Sustained age preparation works for 24 hours. And again, it is a good anti-inflammatory action, and also relieves pain, not only joint pain, but also muscle pain is also significantly reduced with indomethacin. Again, if I am planning for almost 1 month therapy or 2 month therapy, naproxen is also a good option. If someone is having headache, most probably naproxen is better than even if indomethacin, because somehow naproxen actually works better with headache in comparison to indomethacin. Whereas if someone is having multiple joint pain along with fever, indomethacin is definitely works better than naproxen. So what it is my perception for all those three things.
The chronic long-standing use, as Abhay probably has pointed out very well, is this that indomethacin is one of the master drugs where you can really rely on, and especially patients of chikungunya tend to respond a little bit better to indomethacin rather than to even sometimes ibuprofen or even mefenamic acid.
So if I have to summarize between the three drugs, shorter duration up to 2 weeks, non-children, in children in any way you'll prefer ibuprofen, and but or you will go for a paracetamol there. But if you have a person more than 12 years of age, and if he is having a fever, you have three choices. You have nimesulide, you have naproxen, mefenamic acid, and you have indomethacin. So if it is a long-term use, specifically something like ankylosing spondylitis, where you have to give it for a year or two, Or if it is a illness like chronic fatigue syndrome, where you may have to give an NSAID for 3 months or 6 months. And with a joint pain, you can use indomethacin. And if you have a fever with headache, yes, naproxen is another one if you want to use it for a longer period of time. For a short period of time of 2 weeks, Nimesulide can be easily given unless you are dealing with an ICU toxic case where Nimesulide may not be given. Now, coming back to Nimesulide is a drug which causes rapid fall in temperature. Sometimes when you want a rapid fall in temperature, my experience say in typhoid, that this is an observation because it's an unpublished observation that whenever we give a typhoid patient fever not responding, when give Nimesulide, and suddenly the fever becomes in the minus, and this turned out to be a typhoid. Only an observation, because in many cases we have seen a rapid fall of temperature with Nimesulide only happens if the patient has a typhoid. To the extent sometimes we use it clinically, diagnosis before the testing is being done. So Nimesulide, acute 14 days treatment, Nimesulide, more than 14 days to 3 months, you think of naproxen. After 3 months, you have indomethacin in your domain. Remember, Nimesulide cannot be given in children because DCGI has not approved it in children less than 12 years of age. 100 milligram morning and 100 milligram evening. Investigations. Now, one is clinical diagnosis. Clinical diagnosis can give you a lot of picture, but coming back to investigations, investigations will depend upon what you are thinking about it. If you're having chills and Igers, your investigations may be different. But still, some people go for a fever panel. What is that, Abhay, fever panel?
So normally,
should we at all go for it? Should we go like should we have a buffet or an a la carte in fever? Buffet is fever panel.
Classically, what in our hospital, we usually don't go for fever panel, because if you in a tertiary care center, if you are going for a panel, most probably we are not doing justice to the patient. So classically, we don't go for a panel. Since our belt is full of malaria, almost 90% cases, anybody presented to us, chills and rigor everywhere, we go for a CBC, at least minimum investigation is CBC, one ICT malaria, and one urine RM. Only these three classically we do first. After that, then classically we go to the other things. Suppose for typhoid, we go for the typhoid test, we can go after that. Again, if required, we can go culture of the blood culture, urine culture, everything subsequently we can plan that. But in our setup in Odisha government, the three things ought to be done first is one CBC, one ICT malaria, and one urine at least should be done in each and every patient's of fever. That classically what we are doing. And subsequently, we can investigate for other diseases.
So Mangesh, what it tells us is that CBC with ESR is now becoming the diagnosis of choice even in COVID-19. High TLC, bacterial versus viral. High lymphocytes, viral, low lymphocytes, we say acute viral illness like COVID-19 or HIV. And then if you have a low eosinophilic count, 1% or even zero eosinophilia, you know it may be a COVID. High ESR or a rising ESR, typically seen in COVID, unlikely to see in other viral disorders. But here we are seeing a rising ESR. And whenever you see a rising ESR, you look for other two phase reactants, either ferritin or CRP.
C-reactive protein.
Usually, sir, platelets,
if
platelets they don't go down.
You know, this is immunoinflammation. Yes.
Yeah, and platelets usually do not go down in COVID, usually. You know,
yes, platelets do not go down in, so therefore you can see a low platelet, that means a fall in platelet with a rise in hematocrit, that's typical dengue.
So again, in our COVID hospitals, now there are 575 COVID patients are there. In every patient, we are doing C-reactive protein and ferritin as a marker of whether the person are improving or not. Because we have seen at baseline, those who are high CRP and ferritin, in due course of treatment, even if those who are on ventilator, if it's showing a decreasing trend, these patients have high chance they will recover and they are off ventilator. And those who are again further rise, these people are actually having poor prognosis, or what classically we are seeing in our setup.
Yeah. So Abhay, we are also seeing sometimes a discordance between CRP and ESR. Yes. The undergraduate teaching was that if CRP is normal, ESR is high, and that's SLE. That means ESR will keep on rising, but CRP will not. But here we are seeing all types of patterns. We are seeing high ESR, normal CRP. We are seeing high CRP with normal ESR, and we are also seeing patients. Recovery is differential. Sometimes CRP comes back much earlier than the ESR. Your comments on that?
And in fact, I completely agree to what Dr. Abhay said. And also, I would like to suggest that also keep on monitoring their D-dimer levels, because they are absolutely thrombogenic situation. Whatever, whether inflammatory markers about, there can be a debate, but there is no second opinion that COVID is a thrombogenic situation. So keep a watch on D-dimers, especially which can decide about the long-term anticoagulations, even post-discharge, post-treatment. Also, these patients are likely to have. So that is another one good investigation which can be thought about in the situation where you have got high number of COVID patients.
And we are doing D-dimer in each and every patient.
Yes, what about those places where D-dimer is not available? A D-dimer has to be processed within an hour.
Yes.
So all those labs who are not primarily doing D-dimer, the report is unreliable.
Yes.
What about taking the blood, 2 cc blood in a test tube and looking at the clot retraction? That at 30 minutes, if the clot retraction is not there, hypercoagulable state.
Yeah, I mean,
test we used to do in our bedside.
Yeah, I know. It's like in a resource limited places, probably yes, there are few options which we need to expertise.
So what are coming back to the rural areas, because this program is also being watched by many doctors where D-dimer, even in many of the medical colleges, D-dimer is not available.
Yes,
I checked with many of them.
Yes,
so what are the resource limited testing which can be done? One is peripheral smear, which can tell you which can tell you
a good CBC,
malaria, which can tell you hemolysis, which can use so many other things. And what are the other tests which can be done in a resource limited
So a good CBC, a good peripheral thin and thick smear, both very important. A good laboratory, preferably reporting a good thin and thick smear, it's very important. Of course, most importantly, I always have a feeling that, apart from that, you can also call for a dengue specific investigations like dengue NS1 or IgM, if at all you can really get. Or even for chikungunya, you can go for an IgM chikungunya diagnosis, or even as well leptospirosis for. And as far as diagnosis of enteric fever, the most reliable test is blood culture. Vidal can be used as probably a possible, if you get a rising titers, then only it can be indicative of typhoid. But Vidal probably as a diagnostic test for typhoid technically has lost its value. More importantly, for the diagnosis of typhoid, you will require positive blood culture supportive along with the clinical presentation.
So there is a typical thing which I want to say, that in COVID-19, typhoid is falsely positive in majority of the patients. Most of the patients who are dying are the ones who says typhoid was positive. We started
amnestic
medicine and we missed the pneumonia.
Yeah. An amnestic reaction.
So even if say, a lot of the COVID patients we are getting also malarial card test is coming positive. So this I don't know. This few of the patients actually we have done this ICT malaria and some of the patients are come positive. We have treated in the line of COVID. These patients improved, but this false positive malarial we have got in few cases. So don't
probably rapid antigen, Dr. Abhay, probably rapid antigen positive in these patients might be possible that they might have been exposed to malaria previously, even before getting before getting COVID. Because usually positive rapid diagnostic test or suppose a PLDH or Optimal you have done, and these tests are positive, that sure shot tells you that the patient is exposed to malaria, may not be recent.
Yeah.
So that is the difference between actually the physical diagnosis of malaria on a peripheral smear and the rapid rapid diagnosis or non-microscopic tests that we call it.
So it is, as far as investigations are concerned, you can go to any extent. You can go to D-dimer, you can go to interleukin-6. In fact, when you go to theoretically, then you need to do ESR, CRP, D-dimer on a daily basis on day 3, 4, 5, and 6. That's the time when COVID-19 complicates. But yes, you can have lots of resource-limited clinical picture. And in fact, the best lab test is 6-minute walk test. That means 6 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the evening for the first 6 days, do a 6-minute walk test and look for the 6 parameters, maintaining a distance of 6 feet, and look for distance reduce, SpO2 reduction by more than 5. You look for development of temperature. You look for development of hypoxia, that means breathlessness, cough, or difficulty in talking. If you do that, that's the simplest test which replaces most of the, yes, and a new onset tachycardia, which all, and if you have that, take it for granted, you have both a pneumonia as well as a thrombosis, and that may come 2 days before you actually get a resting hypoxia. And at that time, if you start looking for 6 things, ask yourself, do I give him steroid? Do I give him an antibiotic? Is my patient given on steroid or not, antibiotic or not? Is my patient has been given antiviral or not, low molecular weight heparin or not? Does he require a plasma therapy or not? Does he require oxygen or not? That's a formula of 6 to remember. Everywhere there are 6 items, and that's how you decide. So in a resource limited condition, actually you can diagnose a patient, everything you can monitor only with a 6-minute walk test. So coming back to, I will take up lots of questions because we have covered treatment, we have covered diagnosis, we have covered investigations. We have 15 minutes with us with question answers, but let me revise the first 15 minutes. That yes, monsoon is coming and the COVID is reducing. Look for a positivity rate in your area. If the COVID positivity rate is more than 10%, still consider COVID as the first diagnosis. If the positivity rate is less than 5%, it can be anything. And if it is between 5 and 10%, you debate. Fever, low-grade fever, TB versus COVID, high-grade fever, you have so many other diagnoses. Acute management of fever, give them nimesulide, 100 milligram morning and evening. Sometimes paracetamol, yes, people give paracetamol, but there may be some fever not responding to paracetamol. So if you are having a fever not responding to paracetamol, give nimesulide. You have options of naproxen if you want to give it for headache or if you want to give it for slightly longer time. And if you need to continue a chronic fatigue syndrome, which as on today in COVID-19, patients don't qualify because in India, 6 months haven't passed. But we may get some cases going into a chronic fatigue syndrome. In such a situation, the role of indomethacin will come. Investigation, 6-minute walk test, clinically, hemogram, which is CBC with ESR, with a urine examination showing pus cells, absent bacteria, negative culture can be a COVID cystitis. SGOT, SGPT, that is hepatopathy can occur with malarial hepatopathy, can occur with dengue hepatopathy, can occur with COVID hepatopathy. So most important things are, this is now for 15 minutes.
Yes, sir.
How long oral anticoagulants are given in COVID? This is,
usually, yes, the oral anticoagulants or primarily parenteral anticoagulants. If the patient is hospitalized after discharge, at least minimum 2 to 4 weeks. If the patient is on the OPD basis, give it for 4 weeks for sure.
So 4 weeks for sure. Some people give it for 40 days. Some people are saying 3 months. Let it be decided, but depends upon your underlying
usually
of the disease.
What we do is usually monitor D-dimers mostly, and then probably decide the course of the disease. But 4 to 6 weeks are fairly adequate time.
What is Abhay? He wants to know more about CRP.
Sir, actually, there are what I have discussed that for CRP, if there is a rising trend in CRP when the patient is admitted to the hospital, that is bad. Of course, as we have discussed earlier, that CRP is has no correlation. We can have a rapid decrease in CRP, still the patient have worse prognosis. We can have an increase in CRP, still patient has improved. So CRP is not a good indicator, but with CRP, if serum ferritin is increasing and D-dimer is high, then most probably these three will give a clear-cut idea this patient has poor prognosis. And again, what we have discussed, the CRP is not directly correlated to the prognosis of the patients alone.
So do we have some numbers in Mangesh in CRP?
Yes.
2600.
Yes.
Do we have some numbers?
Yes, but usually, we don't look at the numbers, honestly speaking, sir, and it will be unwise to really look at the numbers. It's just the rising or falling trend. Usually look at the trend of CRP and how fast they are rising or how fast they are falling. Usually the rising trend of CRP is more significant. Whenever the CRP is crossing or entering into three digits, so that means that the patient has probably an acute inflammatory response, and you'll need to be a little more careful in these people. So CRP going up 100, you need to be very careful.
The next question is steroid versus NSAID in patients with COVID if they show persistent symptoms after 9 days. Should we continue steroids and give them a, say, post-COVID persistent inflammation? Should we choose a steroid or an NSAID?
No, what actually, sir, studies are telling, there is one of the biggest studies from Italy, where actually the post-COVID, they have taken almost 172 patients. They try to follow up to 3 months. And what they found, actually, steroid, post-COVID, steroid has no significant role. They have told either NSAIDs, like what we have discussed earlier, whether it is indomethacin, whether it is naproxen, or whether it is mefenamic acid. Most probably, these are the 3 drugs which actually worked well in the post-COVID myalgia or post-COVID fatigue syndrome. So, steroid is no need to continue subsequently once the patient has improved from the acute symptoms.
So I have, can I add, sir?
Yes.
Yeah, steroids in COVID per se, usually low dose, because don't go for high dose steroids. The moment you start giving high dose steroids, the viral clearance and viral replication, both they get affected. Viral replication increases and viral clearance goes down significantly. So start with the low dose steroids if at all you are using it as an anti-inflammatory. Probably you may think of increasing or going up a little bit on the dose of steroids during in an acute lung injury. So in a SARI situation or an acute lung injury situation where you are now in a healing phase and you don't want that there should be a fibrosis post recovery or post healing in a healing phase, you don't want a pulmonary fibrosis to end up. There probably you might give steroids for some time. But usually in an acute phase, use low dose steroids. Please do not use high dose steroids, because high dose steroids will cause increase in the viral replication and also will cause reduction in the viral clearance. Sometimes can cause delay in the recovery phase. So be a little careful, use low dose steroids, and most importantly, steroids can be given, especially in those phases where the patient is coming out of the acute lung injury or pulmonary involvement.
So remember what Mangesh is giving the word low. It's a low grade fever, low grade inflammation, therefore low dose steroids. That's how you will remember. This fever is a low grade fever. It's a low grade inflammation. Therefore, give them a low dose steroid. He says, my patient is having rising CRP and ESR, but COVID test is negative. Okay.
Yeah. So 30% of the patients are going to have RT-PCR or even rapid antigen test negative. So believe on your clinical acumen. Look at the other signs. Look at the lungs, and then diagnose. It's not necessary. Sometimes you may have to repeat the RT-PCRs, but in a resource-poor situations or where the reports they can be delayed, maybe that go on your clinical acumen rather than just believing on the RT-PCR reports or rapid antigen reports.
Abhay, do you think that RT-PCR, when we ask for it, we should write down the type of antigen? Because E antigen we know has to be positive. And then some people are not doing ORF, some people are not doing RDRP, some people are not doing N, some people are doing 1, some people are doing 2.
Yes.
If you're going to have only one antigen, your sensitivity will be low.
Yeah.
Specificity will be the same. So therefore,
Yes.
should we start writing RT-PCR with 2 antigen?
You must specify. You must
value.
specify.
If we are writing RT-PCR with 2 antigens, most probably we are giving the most specific answer. But majority time with resource limited and majority time with limited time, everywhere we are doing 1 antigen. They are not doing 2 antigen.
I know, but then you are ending up into a repeat test because
and that is the reason why you get so many negatives, sir.
Yeah, this is the reason actually what they are also telling the RT-PCR, the sensitivity is only 65 to 70%, not more than that. So only thing is that
if as a doctor, if I write a prescription and if I say 2 antigen, who stops me from that?
Yes.
Why should I bother about whether the lab has a resource limited or
Absolutely.
not?
I agree to it.
I am for patient, not for lab. Lab's fine.
No, sir. Actually, here in Odisha, actually, private lab usually not allowed. Actually, it is the government setup or government has put certain labs which they are doing. So there we cannot write 1 antigen or 2 antigen to the lab.
Agreed.
So
agreed. I'm saying about where private sector is allowed.
Yes.
I have a choice where I have a choice. In Mumbai, all of them are doing ORF1A and RDRP.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So they are doing 2. In many other places,
all of us are doing 2.
Yes. The 2 antigen is required. That is a must, ORF1A and RDRP. And then you have to compare apple to apple. When you compare,
absolutely, sir.
you need to compare apple to apple. So therefore, I cannot compare one lab with another unless I know what antigen they have tested.
Sir.
That's what I'm talking about. So therefore, one of the message is that because today's seminar is for everybody from every sections of the society, resource limited and not resource limited. Remember, if you're asking for a CT value of a RT-PCR, you need to compare which lab you are doing, which antigen it was done, and what's the cutoff value. Because the cutoff value of the
CT values sometimes, sir, CT values are little deceptive sometimes, you know.
No, it will be deceptive only if the deceptive will be only 1 or 2 cycles. But if you are doing with the same lab and if the sample is taken correctly.
But usually it is 24. CT value is usually we are taking your 24. If it is more than 24, most probably the patient is not at all infectious.
Yes.
If it is less than 24, then the patient is infectious.
Yeah, you start grading it.
Yeah, so and if it is very much more like 6, 8, 10, then it is very much infectious. The patient at that time,
very high viral
load. And if you have a persistent, antigen positive, if the CT value is more than 24, you know that antigen may be detected, but the virus is non-replicable. So 24 is a cutoff value for RT-PCR CT value. But always you compare the CT value of the same patient with the same lab, with the same type of a reagent, and with the same cutoff value, and you use it with same type of an antigen you are detecting. Coming back to how do we differentiate between SARI and COVID? I think the answer has been given, but I'll ask Mangesh to revise it. SARI versus COVID.
Yeah, SARI, classic non-severe. COVID in the sense, SARI can be one of the features of COVID. SARI is severe acute respiratory injury, or that is what we call it as SARI. And SARI is one of the features of COVID. So in an advanced COVID, you're bound to get some kind of a lung injury. And depending on the CT scan grading there, probably you can decide about mild, moderate, and severe. There, the CT scan grading is again 25 over. And then depending on the different lobes and lobar involvement and the lung involvement, it is graded between mild, moderate, and severe. Where, you know, usually below 5 over 25 is the score which is coming on the CT scan. Then that is mild. Then between 5 to 10 or 5 to 11, it becomes moderate. And then above 11, anything becomes moderate to severe acute respiratory injury.
Quickly,
if you are asking about the differentiation between a non-pulmonary involved COVID and SARI, naturally, of course, as Agarwal sir has already talked about, the best thing is to do a 6-minute test and check out your oxygenations and resting hypoxia. And remember that the classic feature of this hypoxia is this, that the patient do not sense it. So that is the reason why it is called as a happy hypoxia, where patients, they don't feel breathless. Patients, they don't feel hypoxic. And suddenly you find it on the pulse oximeter that the saturations are around 92, 93 or going even below 90 sometimes.
But happy hypoxia can be picked up at least a day earlier if you do.
Yes, absolutely. And that is what 6 minutes test, as you very correctly pointed out, sir.
Ivermectin, UP has brought ivermectin as a part of standard treatment.
Yes, ivermectin is one of the great drugs.
What UP has brought, sir, there are 2 things. One is actually you can, as a health care professionals, we can use as day 1, day 7, and day 30, and subsequently once in a month dose of as a prophylaxis point of view. And if you are planning for treatment, that is actually one paper has also come that if you are planning for a treatment, then you give day 1, day 2, day 3 of ivermectin 12 milligram plus doxycycline 100 milligram twice daily for 5 days. So what for treatment point of view, what they have come, because ivermectin and doxycycline, don't have any interaction itself. And if you will compare hydroxychloroquine plus azithromycin combination, most probably it is far safer. And again, this QT prolongation and cardiac involvement, all those things are still not there with this combination of this ivermectin and doxycycline.
In fact, sir, Academy of Advanced Medical Education.
I want some rapid fire. Mangesh, I want some rapid fire.
Yes, sir.
This is, can CRP be absent? Yes. Temperature, low grade. How to differentiate with TB? Sweating, because TB will have a classical switching with this may not have. How long fever can continue, Abhay?
In tuberculosis, if it is more than 2 weeks.
No, in COVID.
Post-COVID fever, we have seen.
Post-COVID, what actually the studies have shown, it is up to 3 months. They have found up to 3 months. Majority studies, maximum studies have shown up to 3 months. But what Sarah has already told, you can even if up to between 3 to 6 months, you can get fever like that. But Italian, which is the largest study, has shown up to 3 months.
So 3 months fever can exist, and this is really a low-grade fever, exertional in the evening. So I normally tell them that take a thermometer, keep it in your box, close it, and then take it out after 3 months. It can sometimes there. If your CRP, ESR is normal, just ignore it. COVID pneumonia versus non-COVID pneumonia.
Very typical involvements are usually there, usually peripheral involvement, more of a ground glassing rather than classic consolidations that you will see. Usually, the non-COVID pneumonias or community-acquired pneumonias are usually restricted to one lung, unless and until you are dealing with an immunocompromised state, wherein most of the times in COVID-related pneumonias, you'll get bilateral pulmonary involvements, more of a ground glassing rather than a classical pneumonia at the time of the presentation. And naturally, of course, fewer lung symptoms you will get in COVID pneumonia. So bronchial breathings, very unlikely to be there in the COVID pneumonias, where in a classical pneumonia, you will get classical features of pneumonia on auscultation of these patients or examination of the patient.
Again,
differentiating
phases of pneumonia, sir, in the phases of pneumonia, red hepatitis, gray hepatitis, all those things will be
so
there.
All these things will be there in the classical pneumonia, not in the COVID pneumonias.
Absolutely.
And you will not get a pneumonic effusion in COVID.
Pneumonic effusion usually not there. Just to tell you, sir, that the first case of COVID whom we managed was our own house officer in our hospital, and she developed pleural effusion later on. So that was a very unusual thing. Yeah, very unusual.
In severe cases.
Yeah, she was absolutely bad, very bad she was. In a severe cases, you may expect this.
So let me revisit. It's 1 hour. Let me revisit. Dr. Abhay, both of them are senior consultant physicians with a vast experience in management of fever disorders. That first of all, look in your city, what is the prevalence of COVID-19? Is the positivity rate less than 5% or more than 10%? If it is less than 5%, use it like any other disease. Have a differential diagnosis. It may be COVID, it may be non-COVID. If it is more than 10%, take it for granted that the first diagnosis is COVID, and then you come back as an alternative diagnosis of the conditions. If it is between 5 and 10%, you may start seeing the patterns. You can start seeing the patterns. Number 3 is if you have a family developing all symptoms together, that within 48 hours, the whole family is developing symptoms. And if their symptoms are variable, and even if one family member has a typical loss of smell or loss of taste, take it for granted the all fever in the whole family is COVID. The other situation where fever comes in the family together is dengue, because malaria mosquito takes 1 feed every 3rd day, but dengue mosquito takes 3 feeds in a day. Therefore, 3 people getting in a family together disease will be either dengue, but in dengue you will not get variable symptoms. Symptoms will be the same. In corona, what we are getting is 5 members of the family, one having headache, one diarrhea, one sore throat, one fever, and another one having a teeth pain or a dental pain. So all variations may be there. If you have variations, think of COVID. And if you have no variation, think of dengue. If you have rigors, yes, think of malaria. If you have rigors, also think of urinary tract infection. But if you have a urinary pus cells with absent bacteria and culture, again, COVID cystitis comes into a differential diagnosis. If you have a virus with fever and diarrhea, yes, typhoid, dengue, and now COVID-19 comes into the differential diagnosis. Even food poisoning sometimes can have a fever lasting for a day. When it comes to management, yes, acute management, think of Nimesulide. If you still paracetamol, but if you feel paracetamol is not responding, Nimesulide, you don't want to take a chance, give a Nimesulide. Rapid reduction in fever can be given for 14 days, but sometimes you want it for a management of a chronic headache with fever, naproxen, and when you enter longer-term chronic fatigue syndrome or a chronic post-COVID manifestations, lasting a NSAID given for 3 months, think of indomethacin in that particular situation. Testing, the best testing is 6-minute walk test. Apart from that, have a urine examination and a CBC with ESR. And when you have resources, yes, go for ferritin, go for D-dimer, you can even go for IL-6, but remember both D-dimer and IL-6 require dedicated labs. They require to be done. Their lab errors can be very high in D-dimer if the sample is not processed within 1 hour, which usually happens when you send a D-dimer sample outside the lab for a test. So therefore that has no practical use. Coming back to the RT-PCR test, yes, you have a rapid antigen test, but if you're going for a RT-PCR, ask for 2 antigen if positive, and ask for a CT value, and also ask for a cutoff value of that particular lab. And after RT-PCR, you can go for an antigen test. But if you're going for a total antigen antibody test for a COVID infection, you know that it may, because Indian government has not allowed IgM as a separate test, people have brought as a combination that may or may not help you. But definitely if IgG test is positive, you know you have suffered from COVID in the past. So if you have a post-COVID illness, if you have a post-COVID-like illness, antibodies are positive. These people, you can safely give them NSAIDs for a longer period of time. I would like, before I close, I will ask Dr. Abhay Kumar Sahu to give us 5 take-home messages and 5 take-home messages from Mangesh, and then we sign off.
Yeah, thank you, sir. There are 5 things. Actually, COVID, once there is COVID number of cases has come down, we should be very much clear there are malaria, typhoid, dengue. Now the incidence is going to increase. So whenever a fever comes to us, we should keep all those things in mind. Second important thing is malaria which is quite prevalent in the rural part of India. One should keep in mind that only due to COVID, if you are not detecting malaria, most probably we are going to lose the patient, because without antimalarial, these people are not going to improve, and a lot of the people will develop cerebral malaria and they can die. Third important thing is, as Sir has told, if a person with COVID have increase in C-reactive protein, D-dimer and ferritin combination, then definitely the prognosis is poor. And this we believe it is a rising trend is there, then again they have higher mortality is there. And fourth important thing is that if someone is having bilateral pneumonia, as Dr. Mangesh Tewskar has already discussed, if someone is having bilateral pneumonia, then it is more likely COVID pneumonia than the classical community acquired pneumonia, which is usually unilateral and usually having groundless appearance. And in chronic treatment of post-COVID fever or in chronic treatment of myalgia, paracetamol is having less help. And in that case, we can use other NSAIDs which will help, like indomethacin, naproxen, and for the short term, like 10 to 12 days, Nimesulide can also be given. And if someone is having in the post-COVID phase, someone is on ventilator, someone has improved from the particularly some sort of lung injury, to prevent post-COVID lungs fibrosis, what classically is coming nowadays, we can give low-dose steroid for a few weeks. That will help them of prevention of fibrosis in those cases. Thank you.
Quickly, Mangesh.
Yeah, now mostly Dr. Abhay has covered most of the things. So I'll just tell just a couple of things. Look at the good CBC whenever in a patient of fever and you find it confusing that what is the type of a fever. The classic investigation, a simple single investigation that you can call for is a CBC, and look for the WBC count, look for the neutrophils, look for the lymphocytes, look for the eosinophils, and look for the platelets. And they'll give you enough and adequate clue apart from the presence or absence of parasites on the smear or on the CBC. So CBC should never be missed in any of the cases. Number two, in a situation of COVID, please do not react to the investigations. Believe in your clinical acumen. So try to correlate investigations to the clinical scenario rather than chasing down the investigations and treating the patients according to investigations can be extremely dangerous. So look and assess your patient clinically first and then interpret the available investigations accordingly. Do not look at the investigations first and then assess the patient. That can be extremely risky. Number three, in a situation, those who can tolerate anti-inflammatories like nimesulide, one of the wonderful drugs, extremely nice, very effective. COVID is a treatable disease. COVID is a controllable disease, provided you are smart enough to pick it up. Number five is this, that drugs like remdesivir, drugs like Zumabs, drugs like steroids are there to help you. But remember that ultimately it is the patient's response which ultimately decides the outcome of the disease. Thank you.
I'm going to end by saying that whenever you have fever in this season, first ask what is the disease which is prevalent, and two, is it pyrexia or thermia? Pyrexia or thermia, sometimes it will be difficult to differentiate. NSAIDs will work in both. Paracetamol will only work on pyrexia. It may not work on thermia. Yes, when you're choosing an NSAID, shorter acting, for a short duration, you have nimesulide. For a longer duration, you have naproxen and indomethacin, which can be used. That's all for today. Let me thank both Dr. Abhay and Dr. Mangesh to be here.